And our main topic this week here on Mastering Dungeons, we have the great privilege and honor of being able to speak with the main driving force behind MCDM, Matt Colville. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hello, it's an honor, a privilege to be here. I am happy to report that Mastering Dungeons is, I think, the only real industry kind of analysis podcast that my general manager and I both listen to. He has a pretty good information diet, and he makes it a point to listen to you guys every week.
Thank you. Oh, we're sorry. I mean,
yeah.
Well, I mean, we both feel like the quality of content, and you guys do a lot of good research, and so when you're talking about what's going on in the business, it's pretty good data.
Thank you. Well, that's why we're so happy to have you here, because I think, and we both think, we talk about this all the time, Shawn and I, the world doesn't suitably understand what MCDM is doing and how different it is at MCDM. And that's I think a theme of why we have you on the show. But maybe to start things off, Matt, we could talk about your background forever, longer than we have. But so I'm going to try to zero in on.
I'm old. Yeah. So.
yeah, that too. We don't know what that's like, but tell us. But maybe a specific part of your origin story, which is if you zero in, what one part of your gaming history do you think is fundamental to who you are and how you see tabletop role-playing games?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I thought a lot about this. It's interesting because I think that you're asking about my history as a gamer, but my answer, the first blush answer, comes from my employment history. I spent 6 years at a company called Pandemic Studios. This is in the early 2000s, working on two big AAA video games, Mercenaries 1 and Mercenaries 2. I was a designer. I was a level designer on them. And I was also the lead writer. In this day and age, what they would call the narrative director. We weren't clever enough to call it that back then, but that was the gig. And the Mercenaries games were open world sandbox games, very heavily inspired by and explicitly a competitor to GTA. Right. And so your character is dropped in the world, and you can literally go wherever you want. Everything in the game was fully interactable, fully destructible. And being in that unique intersection of being both a designer. So I was on a daily basis, I was building levels, and it was like the greatest G.I. Joe 13-year-old, 9-year-old fantasy, where I would build these levels out in this giant open world. And it was up to me to decide, all right, well, I'm going to put a watchtower here. I'm going to put a heavy machine gunner in the watchtower. And then I would play the game, and I would do no, heavy machine gunner is not. How about a missile launcher guy? Yeah, put a missile launcher guy in there. Okay, great. And I would fire it up again and try all the different ways a player could end up interacting with my level, including what if they use stealth, right? What if they put on an enemy uniform? Is there a dialogue for if they try to stealth their way in or bluff their way in? What about if they hijack a tank? What if they hijack a Jeep? What if they hijack a helicopter? Is there a way is there still, right? And also being the writer, so every single designer at the company had to come to me to figure out, how do I tell the player? How do I communicate this to the player? And the lessons that we all learned together, what you can and can't tell the player, because they can go anywhere they want. They can do whatever they want. You have to be really careful with your language, because stuff that in any other game, stuff to be perfectly fine to have an NPC say this to the player. In an open world game, the player is going to think that they have to go do that thing now, or that they could do that thing, that glib comment that this NPC made. The player is going to assume that they can action that because they can literally go anywhere. And I think about that experience like almost every single day here at MCDM, when we're talking about player psychology, when we're talking about what do you have to tell what information does the director need in order to run an adventure, right? What information is it reasonable for the player to have? How is the player going to behave, right, when they can go anywhere they want? Also, we had early experiences with Mercenaries where people really enjoyed the gameplay, but they found the overall experience to be kind of lackluster. And so that's where we doubled down on the narrative in the next game, because what we learned was players were just following the yellow dot. right?
Mhm.
They were just following the blip, and they didn't need to pay attention to what was happening in the game. They didn't need to pay attention to the narrative, right? Because the UI would make sure they always ended up where they needed to be, right? And so figuring out, well, how do we make it so that it's more grounded in the actual experience of the character, and it's about the character and the choices they make and the people they meet in the world. And that was a huge part of that experience. That second game was much more heavily narrative based. And so I think about that all the time. The amount of lessons I feel like I learned. I think about this every time I'm in a meeting with freelancers. I think I wish I could give everybody in this meeting the experience I had working on those games, because it really changes your viewpoint on being in a fantasy world where you can run around and kind of do what you want.
Yeah. I found a similar thing running the same adventure 20 times.
Sure. Yeah.
And reading the box text, and a single word might trigger the players in such a way. And then you start playing around with that. Yeah. I'm going to leave this word glistening or glimmering off. Yeah. Now, does everyone go to that like they did the last 10 times? Yeah. If I leave it off, they go somewhere else. Okay, this is interesting. And it's what a single word can do.
I think the experience of running the same adventure multiple times, so that you get to the point, almost like a theater actor, you get to the point where you know the lines, and now you can start experimenting, you can start playing around with it, and you start testing the boundaries of what's reasonable and what's possible within the confines of ostensibly the same adventure. I think it's an incredibly valuable lesson. I was really lucky. This is something I think a lot of game devs take for granted, is that a lot of us, and me especially working in video games, I was surrounded by nerds basically 24/7, right? So if I wanted to run D&D at any time of the day for any number of people, I literally could do that. And I took advantage of that. And that meant I was often running the same adventures for different groups over and over again over the course of about 20 years. And it's extraordinary what you learn doing that. And it's kind of where my thesis statement came from, where I say, encounter design doesn't stop just because you rolled initiative. Right. It's like that thing you're running is it might even if you paid for it, it might literally be an untested prototype. Right. And whoever did the testing, they weren't playing with your players. Right. They don't have your set of assumptions. Right. So running the same encounter multiple times for different groups, you learn so much. It's incredibly valuable. I agree.
Fantastic. And so you've had this formative experience. You worked at, as you said, at video game companies. You've worked at Wizards. You've self-published novels. You've done the transition from sharing tips on Reddit to becoming one of the biggest YouTubers in the space with your Running the Game series. How did all of these early experiences lead to MCDM?
It's a good question. I mean, I was always, I don't know what it's like for other people, but everywhere I was at, when I was lucky enough to get a job at Last Unicorn Games, working for Christian Moore and Owen Seiler. Christian's he's at Paizo now. He's super awesome, one of the smartest guys in the business. There was something about working there that I was hyper conscious of how lucky I was to get to do this, even when I was, 26, 27 years old, especially when I was 26, 27. Are you kidding? It was like a miracle. And so I was always paying attention to what was happening at the top. I was really lucky because there wasn't, at Last Unicorn, there wasn't any money. Right. So the office was literally every single person that worked there in one room. There weren't even cubicles. So if there was a problem, everybody knew about it. And I was always watching what Christian and Owen were doing and the decisions they were making. And we argued about it. I was an armchair general. I remember my friend Owen, my boss, at one point said, this is like in 1999, during a smoke break, he said, Matt, it's your destiny to run your own company. And that was a very complimentary thing for him to say, but it was also him throwing a bit of shade at me. It was his sort of passive aggressive way of saying, Matt, it's real easy for you to be critical about this stuff, right? Because you're not the one who loses sleep about it. You're not the actual person who's putting everything on the line, right? And so I always had this kind of entrepreneurial spirit, I think. In fact, when pandemics, between my first video game gig and my second video game gig, some friends of mine and I started our own little tiny video game company. So that was always, I was always kind of curating the people around me, right? Networking. I don't know if everybody does this, but they should, if they can, right? I was always sort of paying attention to the people I was working with and kind of earmarking them for, if I was going to do something on my own. Our art director here, my friend Jason, to a certain extent, the the gears started spinning for MCDM when he messaged me at our last big video game job where we met. And it's apropos of nothing. He just said, there was no preamble for this. I had no idea why he was saying this, but he just messaged me and said, Matt, do you think you could do a better job? Mm. And he meant if you ran this place. Right. And he was obviously very frustrated by some meeting he had just been in. Right. And he was looking for somebody to commiserate with. And I intuitively understood what he meant, that he meant like, if you and I started our own company, would it be different? And I said, no, I do not think I would do a better job. I would just make different mistakes. Right. And then I think the last ingredient was that crowdfunder. I honestly didn't think, I've said this a million times. It happens to be true that I thought we would be really lucky if that 2018 Strongholds and Streaming crowdfunder did $60,000 because there was no precedent for this. I had nothing to go to give any indication what it would do. And I thought this would be an opportunity for my millennial, well, almost all my friends are millennials, and they were all complaining about how, I'm a highly paid video game developer, but I can't afford to own a house in Orange County where I live. Orange County is a really expensive place to live. And I thought, well, this will be great because we'll all still work together here in video games, and we'll do this other thing as a side hustle, and that's where your down payment will come from. But when it did $2 million, I thought, fuck, I can't treat this like just a PDF that I'll get some art for. I'll take this thing, I'll polish it up. These rules that I've had kicking around since the 80s, I'll polish it up, throw some art and some graphic design on it, and put it out there, and it'll be on Drive-Thru RPG. I thought of it like a Drive-Thru RPG style product, right? And then when that number happened, I was like, well, all right, now I have to take it that seriously. I have to take it $2 million seriously, and that means people want a high quality physical product, right? People want something that's been tested. And so that's where MCDM came from. It's a sum of everything I've ever done. I started in collectible card games, right? That was the first thing I ever worked on, was the Dune collectible card game. And that meant I started as a tester. I started as a volunteer tester, and I matriculated into design. So that's where a lot of MCDM's policies come from, is working on non-RPG products, and then applying that to art. Like, we test our RPGs the way we tested a collectible card game, because you can't fuck around with that. Like collectible card games, you can't do it by vibe. Everything will fall apart.
Yeah, if you screw that up, it's screwed up forever. Yeah. The game falls apart. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that a good answer? I don't know if that's a good answer or not.
No, I find that amazing and fascinating, because you're aiming for 60 grand or whatever it is that it might bring. It brings 2 million, and now you've got to do things at a completely different scale. Yeah, and your products are different than you ever imagined, and you follow up with Kingdoms and Warfare. Other one's downstairs for Stronghold, and you just keep. But I guess initially, you are launching things that are written for 5th edition D&D, and you have Strongholds and Followers. You have Kingdoms and Warfare, which itself was 1.3 million crowdfunding. Flea Mortals is 2.1 million. Monster Book, fantastic. That puppy's over here. I'm holding that up.
Really proud of that book. Really, we've already started looking at that book as an inspiration for a new Draw Steel product.
Awesome. You follow the book of boss battles, Where Evil Lives. Yeah. On the Patreon side, you're firing off Arcadia Magazine for a while there, doing monthly releases with a periodical style approach. You're releasing classes. What was this?
Damn, a lot.
Yeah. What was this 5th era edition like for MCDM? Because you go from maybe we'll raise 60,000 and have something that's kind of casual to this.
It was a crazy learning experience, because we didn't know what we could and couldn't do. And that was a blessing and a curse. It meant that I think we greenlit products that we probably would have been better off letting stew longer, like Kingdoms and Warfare. I think in retrospect, we put Kingdoms and Warfare into production only because I said we would during when we were working on Strongholds and Followers. I said that Strongholds and Followers was part 1, and the Kingdoms and Warfare, but that's not necessarily a good reason to do it if there's not demand, right? And so we probably should have crowdfunded Arcadia instead, right? And say, we're going to crowdfund a year's worth of Arcadia. So yeah, we put a lot of stuff into production back then because we had a lot of money, and we wanted to take that money and turn it into products. That's a huge part of the way MCDM works. MCDM is not a financial instrument. It has literally never occurred to me when I see that dollar value, I think, goddamn, there's a lot of people who I don't want to let down, right? And so that means we need a team of really good people. The 5th edition era was crazy because I felt like it was weird because I came from an era, the 90s, in tabletop RPG development. I was the art manager for a long time for the Star Trek RPG. And we were getting like a book done every like a couple months. Like it was a crazy the amount of product we were putting out. And so starting MCDM, I'm like, well, that's the baseline, right? Is that you get a lot of shit done. But that it wasn't really, I didn't really square that circle in my head, because when I go back and look at the kind of products, the 1990s, you know what I'm talking about, like Pinnacle, Holistic, Last Unicorn, all these AEG, and you look at the stuff they made, yeah, you can get 8 books done a year, Matt, because 6 of them are 128-page soft covers. They're all black and white, except maybe like one hardcover. And that hardcover, the only reason it's color is because you're a licensed property and you can just go get screen grabs of 70 years of Star Trek bullshit, Matt, or the Lord of the Rings license. Right. And so we were putting stuff into production at a crazy rate just because in the back of my head, I was like, well, why not? I don't understand. Yeah. Why can't we? Well, there are probably good reasons why we can't. So there's products that we really believed in that still haven't seen the light of day. Like the book we have like 60,000 words written for Capital, and they're really good. I just went back and looked at Capital's our big urban setting that we're working on. And I went back and looked at some of that stuff a couple of months ago, and it's still really, really high quality. All the people that worked on it all went and got like full-time jobs at Wizards of the Coast and places like that. That's where we found James. And there's the heist. Like we were at a whole adventure. The heist is a whole adventure that we want to put into production, which is like, what if you were burgling Castle Ravenloft, right? And we have a whole manuscript of that's done for 5th edition, right? That's ready with maps and everything. I think Scott Fitzgerald Gray was the writer on that. We put we put the Somnium Tenebris, which is a giant in our setting, a voiceless talker, but in 5th edition, it would be a mind flayer ship, a big squid ship. It's deck plans it's like a site-based adventure. You can do whatever you want with it. These are all things we put into production that never, so when people think about MCDM, they don't think of all the things that we fucked up on, right? These are all things that we put into production, but have literally still never seen the light of day. And we're just lucky that we got really lucky, guys. We got really fucking lucky that like, Strongholds and Followers is the worst thing we've done, right? And then the next worst thing we did was Kingdoms and Warfare, right? And then the next worst thing we did, like everything we did, we just got more and more bites at the apple and more chances. That's why I try to tell people in this space is, if you're just getting started, that your job is not to get rich. Your job is to live to fight another day. Right? Because it's just getting more bites at the apple. And so that by the time we were finally going to do our own thing, like finally make our own original product from scratch, we had learned, Flea Mortals is sort of how we learned how to be MCDM. Right. We had James now full time. We had Jeff in place. We had all the people we needed, and we were able to produce what I thought was an incredibly high quality monster book. And from off the back of that, we're like, all right, let's go for it. Let's do Draw Steel. So that we didn't, if we had done Draw Steel out of the gate, there wouldn't have been the demand, and there wouldn't have been the team. It would be unrecognizably different, and it would be bad. It would not be anywhere near as good.
Well, speaking of Draw Steel, right, you had all these 5th edition products, and then you decide, all right, here we go. We're going to launch our own role-playing game. And it did a modest $4.6 million on BackerCat. Yeah, which is absolutely amazing. How did you feel like that support matched up to your expectations? Did you say, we've learned everything and now we're ready, we have an audience? Or was it more of a, well, let's see if we get $60,000 again?
It's a good, we didn't know. It was a really scary time because everybody watching this video, and certainly all the people in this call, you can all look at that number and we can come up with different reasons why it's that many people or that much money. And we were doing the same thing internally. We had all sorts of different models. It was very easy for us to model a future where we didn't fund. We asked for the amount of money it was actually going to take to make that product. We asked for like $1.2 million. And there were people, professionals in the space who were telling us you can't do that. You can't ask for that much money. People will get sticker shock and they'll freak out and they'll be like, how come it costs this much? And we're like, well, we disagree. A lot of those same people told us you can't do crowdfunders in December. And we're like, that's our number one sales month. Are you kidding? We've got our own store. Like, all our data indicates that this is going to be fine. So it was a terrifying, none of us would have been surprised. None of us would be surprised if people were like, super cool, not for me. And there were lots of those folks. Actually, there were lots of folks who were like, this looks really cool. I don't want that game. Right. And I felt like Draw Steel, not uniquely and not alone, was ushering in a new era of clarity in product development, where people feel like, unlike, I would say, 5th edition, which is sort of the only game that I'll hang out to dry by name. Unlike 5th edition, there's not a reason to exist other than the brand. Right. It's hard to kind of point to what is that game about. And so making something like Draw Steel, even the name we thought was a risk. Everything seemed like a risk. And when we look at the numbers, we're well aware that some percentage of that, it was a little over 10,000 people, I think. Some percentage of that 10,000 people, no, it was way more than that. It was 30,000. I'm thinking of Crack the Sun. Some percentage of that 30,000 people were just a protest vote against the tyranny of Hasbro. Right. We all know that. Some percentage of them were like, I don't know if this is for me. I'll check it out, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. And then some percentage are like, that's my game. That's the game I've been wanting forever. And all those things are literally true. All those people are in that mix. And actually, we feel like it's roughly a third based on the performance of Crack the Sun. That there's probably about a third of people who are like, I don't really care about this. I just want to send a message. Right. And if it turns out to be awesome, they'd be happy. And about a third of the people were just, skeptical, but willing. And then a third of the people were true believers. And, we're not going anywhere. So we're going to crack away at those other folks and see if we can't peel some more people away from 5e. Is that an answer to the question?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. There's so much you've said that were you going to say something, Shawn?
Nope.
There's so much that I find really interesting about everything that you said, but I know there've got to be folks out there. I've pretty sure I know where you're going to go with this, but I have to ask it because I know there are folks who want to know, are you really leaving 5e behind? Like, isn't it this enormous market? Don't you want to still take, like, say, Crack the Sun and make the 5e version?
It's interesting. It's interesting because, I mean, the answer is yes and no. When I think about 5th edition, I think about a certain rule set, right? And I think of that as distinct from the community of players. The community of players, I would love to continue serving, right? Because it's where my heart is, right? That's the D&D was my home game for a long time. I played lots of other RPGs, right? But we always came back to D&D in the end. I love the history of it. I've done whole videos just on the history of the hobby. But if you watch Running the Game is not really about 5th edition. It's not really about the rules. It's about, it's sort of universal. So I don't have, when I think about Crack the Sun, no, I don't think about bringing it to 5e. I think it's not my fault that you can't really do crack. It's not my fault that 5th edition, the rule set doesn't support the gameplay of Crack the Sun as well as Draw Steel does. You could do it, but it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't have that same, there's certain things we can do. We can push the player. We can throw them into the deep end in insane ways. As you folks know, you guys have played the game. You can throw the players into the deep end out of the gate and challenge them in ways you literally can't do in 5th edition. At least you can't do it over and over again. You could do it. Maybe you could set up a specific scenario. But so no, I don't think, oh man, it'd be great to bring Crack the Sun to 5e. However, because of the way 5th edition works, we had a whole line, like Draw Steel is very much our reaction to 5e and being like us wanting to go to the community of 5e players and go, folks, there's a better way. It doesn't have to be like this, right? And to that end, we would love to bring the Tactician to 5e. That was what we were in the middle of working on when the OGL debacle happened. I thought the Tactician was going to be the next product we made, and I thought it was going to come to 5th edition. And I thought, there'd be a certain level as a Tactician where you no longer roll the hit. Why would I? I don't need to roll the hit. I'm a professional. Like, what do you mean miss? What's wrong with you? Right. And you can understand why I want to do this, right? Because that's kind of Draw Steel gameplay, is you never miss. And there's nothing about the rules. There's nothing about the math of 5th edition that you couldn't just with real simple math, figure out, all right, well, if I miss 35% of the time I do this much damage, how much damage should I do if I never miss this much? And then all the math would still work. And then there's a certain level, probably a very high level, where you crit every time. Again, I'm a professional. What do you mean? I don't. Yeah. So, and I really wanted to do that. And we still talk about it. It's just economically, it doesn't make sense for us unless it were in something like D&D Beyond. If the tactician were in D&D Beyond, then we would probably green light it. And so it's not impossible. We had a really good relationship with the folks at D&D Beyond. The Illrigger was a massive hit for us, and we have internal rumblings of how well it did for them, and they seemed really happy with it. And we got to put a bunch of stuff up there. So that's the only sort of scenario under which we can see working on something. It's more about showing, just like we did with the talent, being like, guys, playing a wizard doesn't have to be this weird, right? There are other ways to do it and still work within the framework of 5th edition.
Fantastic. So I
also, I didn't think I should have said this earlier. I didn't think that doing draw steal was a risk. I felt like the risk was sticking with 5th edition. I really believe that. I really believe the risk would have been just being another company in the sea of 5e producers. And I felt like that was the risk. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I wanted to ask about a number of things you brought up before. Like you talked about things, I forget the exact phrasing you used, but something along the lines of, it's not a financial investment we're making. It's and get into get into the stuff of MCDM staff, contractors, finances. And for folks who may not understand the unusual company that MCDM is. So how many employees do you currently have at MCDM?
Well, we just offered Paul Hughes, who folks might know from Blog Holding, a full-time position. He accepted. He's going to be starting in April, and he'll make, including me, employee number 12. Although that's a little misleading because we have 12 full-time employees, but we also have a whole bunch of contract employees, folks folks like Lord Durock, John Champion, our chief moderator. We pay him. We have testers we pay. We have dozens of freelancers, including freelance artists, freelance writers. We have, sensitivity readers, editors, layout folks, graphic designers. There's a giant pyramid of people that sort of depend on us for, if not their livelihood, then at least a steady paycheck.
So how do you organize all that? You mentioned a pyramid. Do you have a lot of management? Do you have departments? How does that all get sorted out?
I'm a big believer. I've worked at places where, we're a flat hierarchy. Right. We're a flat hierarchy. I'm like, no, you're not. You're just lying to yourselves and each other. Right. Everybody knows who the leads are. Why are you pretending? Right. And so for me, I actually really like people having really clear job descriptions. And I like having a clear hierarchy where everybody knows that person's my boss and that person's my direct report. And as long as I keep that person happy and that person's not freaking out, then I did my job. Right. And so MCDM internally is very hierarchical. But every full-time employee is sort of at the top of the hierarchy, right? So there, we have a freelance contract CFO that we pay, and he said he was trying to explain to us how weird this company is because he manages the finances of lots of companies. He's like, everybody at MCM is functionally a director, right? No one here is making $65,000 a year. Right. And that's how most companies work, is that they pay their employees. Almost everybody at almost every company makes the same, which is as little as ownership can get away with. And that's not how MCDM works. It never really has been. The people I wanted to work with were just as talented as I was. James works just as hard as I do, if not harder. Jason, Grace, these folks are. They're not just incredibly talented. These aren't. There's another model, which is that you go hire enthusiastic kids out of college that don't know any better, and you pay them peanuts, and they can't afford a house. They have to all live together in an apartment, and that I watched that happen. The lesson I learned from Christian and Owen, Last Unicorn, they didn't run the company. They paid us as much as they could get away with, and there were other companies that were kind of sister companies that we really liked those guys and we liked their games, but an average employee there was making half or a third what we were making. And so they had a lot more employees, but they all had to live 5 up in an apartment together. And like, that's crazy. So if I want to hire people like Jason, if I want to hire people like James, I got to pay them, because literally Blizzard, like I poached some of these people from big video game companies, and they could just shop themselves around and they could do really well. So I've got to compete. My whole, it's a very middle class way of running a company. My attitude was, if we hire really good people, really high quality people, and pay them well and give them authorial power over what the work they're doing, so that it's not just me, the dictator, saying make it like this, although it is often that they will make a great product. And I just had faith, and I still have this faith, that a great product will find an audience, right? And that the audience will pay a premium that lets the company keep working, and that just creates the cycle that just keeps going, right? That's the fundamental principle, is find really, really, really high quality people. The success of MCDM is not the success of Matt Colville. It's the success of these 12 people who are all incredibly, they're all as good as I am at what they do. They are all as good as I am at what they do. And our success, you know, we don't live, we don't pay our employees off the revenue of our back catalog. When you see one of those crowdfunders, that's how we pay ourselves. That's where our money comes from. That's our livelihood. We are going to live on that money until the product is done. We're going to put all that cash into the product, which is to say the people working on it. So the back catalog ends up paying our bonuses, right? So if we want to if anybody here, the range of salaries here is incredibly shallow, right? The difference between the cheapest employee and the most expensive employee is very little money. And so if anybody's gonna get rich off of this, we all have to get rich. That's the way it works, is that no one here, including the owner, including me, no one here gets rich until we all do.
Well, we spoke to several multinational conglomerates before this interview, and you're doing it wrong, Matt, because I don't know how you're going to get your yacht that way.
It's funny
but truly, if I think about this industry, there was a very talented, long-running creator who recently shared that, you know, for many years, and they've showed this in the past as well, for many years that they didn't pay themselves a salary. But they've been paying themselves, you know, 50 some odd thousand a year is what they pay themselves. And they are what's considered successful in this industry. You're doing it really differently with this idea of everybody at the company gets paid roughly the same amount. And this idea that your bonus, I mean, first of all, you're using the word bonus. And that the bonus is funded entirely, if I'm hearing you correctly, and I've heard you share on Twitch some numbers and thoughts, you know, it sounds like you're devoting entire pools of money to your employees.
Yeah. I mean, that's where the money, that's, you know, when I say that's where the money goes, that's a little misleading, because when you think of something like the Ajax edition or the limited, the Cithron Ronazir edition of Crack the Sun, the money we raise selling those products goes into making those products. Mm-hmm. We essentially make no money off of those, right? If you see the crowdfunder and you could see how much of that crowdfunder money went to the Ajax edition, that's how much we spent making that thing. Yeah. But apart from stuff like that, like, you know, we pay our freelancers a lot of money, and it works out to be like, if you could work as a freelancer for MCDM for like 50 weeks out of the year or whatever, I think it's something like $70,000 a year, right? Which the challenge is getting that much work out of us, sure, right? The challenge is not how much we pay. So it's not just our salaries. It's also how much we pay our freelancers, how much we pay illustrators, how much we pay our editors. And the fact that we can do things like we can afford to put things through sensitivity reading because of how much money we charge a premium for the product, and we don't mince words about it. We don't apologize for it. There's lots of people online, if you know where to look, who are perfectly happy to complain about the cost of the PDF, right? And like, how can they charge that much for a PDF? But the game's free. The game's free and everybody knows it. You go on Scribd and you can see it's got hundreds of thousands of downloads on Scribd. You can go on the Trove. You can, anybody, what are you talking about? We opened everything. We opened the setting. We opened everything except the art. You can go, we know there are people playing on Owlbear Rodeo using Forged Steel and they haven't spent any money, right? So it's obvious that it's not, those people who are complaining, they're not complaining because of the price point. They're complaining because they have philosophical objection. This is the thing that bugs the hell out of me. I can't speak to other companies. I genuinely, one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview was because I would love it if more people could have the success that we're having. Are you joking? Of course. Like it's extraordinary. I am very happy that I get to work with these people and work on these products. Our community is incredible, but I honestly don't know. I can't speak to how other companies work and why it is that MCDM is different, except that I think we are not afraid to charge what we think the product is worth. Right? Because at the end of the day, we're like, look, we opened the whole thing, so you have nothing to complain about if you don't like the price point. And the Delian Tomb, which is our starter set, it's $10. It's a steal. It's our best-selling product ever. Like just the other weekend, we sold in 2 days over the weekend, we sold 150 Delian Tombs, and there was no promotion. That wasn't a result of anything. That's just a normal weekend for us. 9 months or whatever after the game came out. That's crazy. That was just a data point our general manager mentioned in passing. And I was like, what the hell? So wow. I think that it's a question of the system working, right? We're paying stupid amounts of money for these things. I see other companies that can do things we can't do. I don't want to get into details because I have a lot of respect for these companies and I don't want to come off like shade, but I'm like, how the hell do they afford to do that? And our general manager says, well, because the average employee there probably makes about $70,000 a year. Yeah. Right. So when they do a crowdfunding that does as well as ours, or even half as well as ours, they can spend money on all kinds of crazy stuff that we don't have because the money goes to the people. It goes to all the people working on it.
And you've kind of mentioned it on Twitch before, but are you willing to share like what the word rate is and your hourly rate for meetings, or give us
that's all public knowledge.
Salaries are like.
We also don't use NDAs. We've only ever signed one NDA as a company, and we immediately regretted it. We don't ask anybody who works for us to sign NDAs. It's your if you're a freelancer working for us, my attitude is it's your job. Do what you want with it. And so far it's been 8 years. I think 8 years MCDM's been around, which is a crazy amount of time, and we have not had any reason to regret that even a little bit. I think right now our word rate is 35 cents a word, which it's funny because I remember a lawyer at another company I was at in tabletop in a meeting was like, wait, we pay, and I think it was like this is 25 years ago, we paid like 15 cents a word or something. He's like, hang on a minute, we pay by the word? You mean we pay for every like and if and the and but? And we were like, yeah, we do. And he's like, that's ridiculous. And I was not used to seeing, I was like 26 years old, and I was not yet in a position to speak truth to power. And I was really happy that the Star Trek line developer said, well, if you can think of a better way to do it, I'd be happy to hear it. So if you're watching this video and you're like, they pay by the word, it just turns out to be a really useful metric, right? It's any metric you came up with would be arbitrary. So why not use by the word? And we only, I think by the schedule, Teos, you might know this better than me. By the schedule, we only expect people to write about 1,250 words a day. And
we try to keep it reasonable. And I can say on this subject of pay rate, recently one of our project writers, was, can I invoice? And we gave them the yes. Yeah. And they verified everything with me because they said, I've never charged this much for a project before. It feels weird.
People don't get it. Like, we've actually somewhat notoriously, our art director, Jason, was talking to somebody. There's a lot of freelance artists in this space are from South America or Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe. And they love tabletop companies because tabletop companies always need more art. Right. They always need more art, and they don't have a lot of money in American dollars. But if you live in Croatia, that's could be actually quite a lot of money. And there was somebody, I think he was in Brazil, and he gave us a quote, and our general manager was just like, no, I'm not going to pay you that little. That's ridiculous. Like that's like, and it angered him, and he wanted to make a Patreon post calling out the very, very large company in this space who had lowballed that artist and given that person the complex they had that made them think it was a reasonable thing to ask to pay that little amount. He was really angry, and I was like, no, that's not okay. That's not a cool thing to do. I'm sorry. Was there a question? Well, I forget now what we were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, so. One thing I wanted to say is let's assume that you're paying 12 employees north of, I don't know, what number could we say, north of 90 north of.
Oh yeah,
something like that?
well north of that. Yes.
So that's unheard of in this industry. You're paying your freelancers $50 an hour for a meeting to talk about the thing they're going to do. You're paying them 35 cents a word, which is more than anyone else.
And we pay for revisions. That's the thing that I don't know if people realize this, but if you're lucky enough in this space to get a freelance writing gig, because obviously there's more people that would like to do it probably than there are paying gigs. But if you get the chance to do it and they say, well, give us 5,000 words on this topic, and you write 5,000 words and they're like, these 5,000 words are bad. Write a new 5,000. In fact, throw out 2,500 and give it, right? They don't pay you for that. They're still only going to pay you for 5,000 words. So if it takes you 10,000 words to make them happy with 5,000, you only get paid for 5,000 words. And our attitude is like, but that's stupid. You did the work. You did the work. So like our attitude is your time is valuable. Your time is, and I honestly don't know how else to do it. I don't know how else to do it. Like I want to sleep at night.
And I love that. I love that.
There are people. Go ahead.
On behalf of freelancers everywhere, thank you.
Yeah.
Because people would come to me from other companies and say, what are other companies paying? And as someone who freelanced for a lot of companies, I was the keeper of the knowledge that not a lot of people had. And now, recently after working for MCDM, I can say, well, they pay 35 cents a word and $50 per hour for meetings and for revisions. And
we pay
we pay
exactly. It's none of this. As far as I know, I don't go over our contracts, but there's none of that net. Like if you're a normal freelancer, I don't know what it's like now, but in the 90s, a normal freelancer wouldn't get paid. This is fucking crazy. So I apologize for swearing, but a normal freelancer wouldn't get paid until 30 to 60 to 90 days after the product came out.
Mm-hmm.
After it came out, which might be 9 months after you worked on it, right? And why did it work that way? Well, because they needed the product to come out and generate revenue to pay you. And I'm like, whoa, why? So for us, when you see that, every once in a while, you'll see somebody in our community say, when is MCDM going to move on from crowdfunders? And I interrogated that. I actually went and kind of followed people around online and asked them why they were asking that question. I wanted to understand where the impulse came from. And what I learned was that there's a cohort of people out there that view crowdfunders as inherently suspicious. Inherently suspicious, not suspicious on a case-by-case basis. No. All crowdfunding is inherently suspicious. And I was like, oh, okay, now I understand why you're asking that question. We do not see it that way. We simply do not agree. I do not. In fact, I think it's safe to say no one at MCDM views the concept of crowdfunding as being inherently flawed or suspicious. We see it as being somewhat miraculous. Right. And it gives an extraordinary number of creators the opportunity to go direct to the consumer and see, is there an audience for this? How big is that audience? Do they want it? How badly do they want it? What are they willing to pay for it? And that sets the scope and scale of the product, which is a miracle. Like if we had known working on a game like Mercenaries, how many units we were going to sell? Are you fucking kidding me? All right. That game would have been a lot better and we would have been a lot happier. Right. If we knew going into it, we were going to sell 2.5 million units. Oh, really? Awesome. Right. So that notion of what does crowdfunding do? It lets us pay this like it's not risky or speculative for us. We've got the money. It's in the bank. We can do the math and we can see, okay, well, we're going to run out of money, which is how it works, right? We're going to run out of money on this date, which is fine because we ship on this date and we'll probably have another crowdfunder here. So we got plenty of time. Everything's fine. Right. So as long as we keep making the right products, right, at the right price point, the right products, meaning if it's the wrong product, the people will tell us they won't buy it. Right. We keep making the right product at the right price point. We get to keep working with cool people.
Yeah.
I hate to say anybody could do this because if you're just starting off and you can't, and this is your first time trying to do your own thing and you're working with freelancers, you gotta live within your means. Right. Yeah. So you can't look to MCDM and be like, oh, I'll pay 35 cents a word. Right. No, that's not going to work for you who have a full-time job and have no money. But I guarantee there are definitely companies in this space who could afford to pay more, but there's somebody at the top who wants to, they have a nicer house than I do.
And I struggle because, on one hand, like I get it, like there are companies out there that truly can't do it. And we hear companies, even established companies, say, we just can't pay more than, whatever it is, 8 cents a word, whatever. But you also hear companies that have been around for a while, have had really successful games, and they say, for this product, we had to use AI for art, because of the cost. And it's like, you know, and or things like, I can only pay myself $50,000 and I run this company, right? Like, do you have any insight? Because I beat my head up trying to think about this constantly, of how do you get more companies to succeed and our hobby not be in this sort of, where it's always like you're moving through mud instead of actually being able to pay everybody well. Like, do you have any clarity on that? Because I sure don't.
If I do have clarity on that, it's not useful, unfortunately, because the only thing I can think of when I look at some of these publishers who have, from the outside, it seems very successful. But then when they share their numbers, I'm like, that's hardly anything. Right. I can't explain it. I don't know how to square that circle. The only thing I can think is it has to do with the power of YouTube and social media. I had the YouTube channel. It's impossible to underestimate the success of the YouTube channel when it comes to MCDM. And fundamentally, luck, an enormous amount of luck, and I would say specifically being in the right place at the right time. That I was making videos about how to run D&D, how to run 5th edition, aimed at brand new people, just when Critical Role and Stranger Things was exploding. Right. And there was a whole generation. I did not know that was happening. I sort of could tell it was happening. Like you mentioned a Reddit post of mine. That's like years before running the game. I said advice to new dungeon masters, which somebody asked Matt Mercer for advice and he went and linked them to that article before he knew me. It got picked up by like Kotaku or some shit. Right. So I could sense that there was a new generation of nerd, but that was mostly coming off the back of, it was a new edition. But it wasn't until Critical Role and Stranger Things that there was this explosion of interest in the hobby. And I think the trick was I was making videos. Lots of people have YouTube channels. So what's the difference? I spent that time showing people how I think. Right? Showing people what I value as not just as a dungeon master, but as a game developer. Right? So eventually the videos went from being how to be a good director, how to be a good dungeon master, how to be a good referee, to talking about why are things the way they are. Right? What are dungeons for? There's a video I said, what are dungeons for? Because I was trying to express to people, that there are different genres of RPG. Right. And a dungeon crawler is only one of them. Is 5e a dungeon crawler? I was trying to get people to think like a developer, but I was also trying to show them how I thought, right? Action-oriented monsters, huge hit video, me trying to show there's a better way to do this. And I was trying to show people how I think as a developer. So it's not just Matt had a YouTube channel. Lots of people have YouTube channels. It's the fact that I was building an audience of people that understood what I valued as a game designer. And so when it came time to actually put game content in front of them, they did not think that was that big a risk. They're like, no, I know who this guy is. I know what he values. I know what matters to him. And that's where our community came from. Yeah. Right. So the success of MCDM is 30% luck, right? I would say probably closer to 50%, but 30% luck, 30% the success of the value of not the YouTube channel, the value of the YouTube channel. The phrase I use is, if you want to know if you're going to like a game or not, just go find out who's in charge, who actually is in charge of that project, who's actually in charge, not the lead designer, not even necessarily the creative director, who pays them, who decides. If you know the answer to that, if you know that person's name, and you can go hang out in their Twitch channel, right? And you can learn what do they value, you're going to know whether or not you're going to like that game, right? You're going to know whether or not you're going to like that game because you know what's important to that person. And then so that's a third of it, was the value of the YouTube channel was kind of showing people, I'm not a YouTuber, I'm a game developer. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about what matters to me. And then the other third is the success of the team, the success of James Intricasso as a lead designer. I mean, holy shit. Like, I told James this over a year ago. I said, if Draw Steel's a hit, and from my point of view, I would characterize Draw Steel as being a moderate hit. It's a little bit more than a modest hit, I would say. A little tiny bit more than a modest hit. But it's not a runaway hit. It's certainly not a runaway success. No way. But it is a modest hit. I said, if this game's a hit, it's going to be because of you. I said, if this game's a flop, it's going to be because of me. And I meant that. I genuinely meant that, because Draw Steel is fundamentally a collection of my ideas, how classes should work, the concept of malice, the heroic resource. Those were my ideas, and they are the foundation of Draw Steel. But it was James's job to balance the math, right? That's a full-time job all on its own. And then he had to balance the action economy. That's another full-time job. And then he had to come up with the language of Draw Steel such that what you read in chapter 1 still makes sense in chapter 7, right? That's another full-time job, right? That was not my job. That was his job as lead designer, was to do all that heavy lifting. That's what I mean when I say if Draw Steel is a hit, it's because of James, right? When people talk about our art, they typically talk about our art in the context of how much we pay people. But then you look what we get for it. We get people like Nick and Grace and Jason. We have visual design. We have original visual design in our products. I don't know if people understand that, how fucking wild that is in this space, is that we spend thousands of dollars on art that you never see. We spend art just exploring what does an MCDM orc look like, right? If you just work in the 5e space, all that art direction is already done for you. You already know you're using Wizards of the Coast orcs. You're using Wizards of the Coast elves. That's not how we work. We do everything from scratch. So our Woad elves, really popular design. The big wide eyes, big scoop. That's from Jason. That's Jason noodling around. And some of our most iconic visual design comes from paying our art team just to noodle on stuff for months and go down dead ends. So the success of MCDM is the success of the team. It's not me. I'm at best a minor component of the success of MCDM.
I love it. We're getting on in time, and I want to have infinite time.
I realize that, and I apologize, but you're the one asking the question. All I can do is answer it. Is that a useful answer? Is there anything that can be gleaned from this that could be applied to people who aren't us?
Well,
or is it just fuck it? It's you can't play by.
What do you think, Shawn?
Well, the 30-30-30 is huge, right? Mm-hmm. And I would even say within some of that 30%, there's even more breakdown.
Sure.
Because I personally have worked with, we'll call them internet personalities, right? Who had a huge following, but they weren't game designers.
Yeah.
And sometimes projects that they did that were game designed worked well. And sometimes it went horribly. And this thought that there has to be a game designer somewhere in there is huge. Mm-hmm. Whether that game designer comes from outside the sphere of that personality and works with them, or takes over completely, or there has to be this thought behind the game design process if you're going to have a good game design.
Yeah. I mean, that's our James told the story to me. I hope he's told this publicly, where he was on a panel with some Wizards of the Coast folks at a convention. And one of them said, look, you guys don't have to worry about this or that. We are fundamentally a book company. That's how we make our money, is we make books. And James, I don't think he said anything on the panel, but he thought something and came and said it to me later. He's like, that's why I'm an MCDM, because we make games. Right? We make games. Like we're a product oriented company. Like I wanted to make art. That's where I come from. I come from making RPGs, but I also come from, there's this weird, like, I'd be curious if you guys feel the same way. There's this weird attitude in the hobby. Not everybody has this attitude, but a lot of people do, that role-playing games are fundamentally a hair shirt existence, right? That if an RPG becomes sufficiently fun, that there's a problem. And people start saying, hang on a minute, that looks an awful lot like a board game to me. Or they'll say, I don't know, that looks an awful like a video game to me. I'm like, it's interesting that those are the two examples you use, because those are uniformly things that people associate with being fun. Right. And that being a director, this was a big part of my channel, is that being a director should be fun. Right. If it's not, then we're all doing something wrong. It shouldn't just be rewarding.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's, I think, a lot of our attitude is, no, man, the play is the thing. It's all about, is it fun to play? And there are people who can have success in this space. Like you were saying, Shawn, you worked for influencers. They can make a product that's a huge success that no one's going to play. And that's not a flaw or a problem, right? The audience for that influencer, they look at this really cool thing that shows the influencer as a kind of a fantasy character and a bunch, and it's got some game text to it, and they read it. They paid for it. They read it and they are happy. They're like, this is cool. I'm glad I did this, right? So that exists right alongside a game like Draw Steel, where we play tested the shit out of it. We prototyped. We were play testing in the prototyping phase. We played the game to design that game. And that comes from my time working on not RPGs. When I started off, we didn't test RPGs. We played them maybe a little bit. And I was like, this is fucking crazy. I come from CCGs. You can't not test a CCG. That's bonkers, right? And so that's our focus is on the product and the game and making it fun. Anyway.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting issue here of you must have games in our space suffer from the space being primarily small, especially whenever we're saying non-D&D. So to become a successful company, you need an audience. But a lot of times, it's this whole idea, if you're a small company, you may not be able to be anything like an influencer or know how to work with influencers effectively. You want to be in the YouTube space, but doing so, as you said, in that sort of convincing, real way is exceedingly difficult. Just like someone who manages, if you have a big enough company, managing an RPG area is challenging, because how do you understand what the game actually is and what it's really supposed to do? And so it's a weird mix of, you must be able to get an audience, you must be able to develop a very special relationship with them to expand beyond the bounds of that normal RPG confine. Otherwise, you're down to essentially the same old distribution model of being in hobby stores, which is tiny, right? And so
that's death. Hobby stores hobby stores are a bad match for tabletop role-playing games, I think. Speaking on behalf of many people who are good friends of mine who own game stores and lament the difference between the people who come in to spend money on card games, board games, miniature games, and role-playing games. One of these things is not like the other, right? And we can all talk about why that is. But yeah, I think that there is a kind of a very 1990s attitude in the hobby space of how you make money and the idea of selling through distribution, which to me is a measure of last resort. That's how MCDM approaches it, right? We go direct to the consumer. We have the technology to do that. We do our own fulfillment. I mean, we don't literally do our own fulfillment. We pay third-party logistics companies to do it. But if we did it ourselves, we would suck at it. So that's the nature of the beast. And so selling direct, building that relationship. I think a perfectly valid path for somebody getting started. I don't know if this is what you were asking, but a perfectly valid path would be as a critic, right? Is to start off reviewing products and having some sort of not being a critic, not being a gossip monger, not being not clickbait, actual criticism. The idea of developing a language of criticism so that as you are reviewing products, your audience is learning. Again, they're learning what you value. Right. And that requires you to have discipline. You've got to be consistent. You can't just be, it can't be about clickbait. It's got to be about your internal model for what makes a fun game and what makes a good RPG, so that over time you're building an audience of people who are on the surface level. They're there for your reviews, but what they're actually doing, the spoonful of sugar with the medicine, is they're learning how you think as a developer, so that when you finally come out with your first product, you've got an audience of people. At the same time, you'll have an audience of people who are like, fuck that product from that person, the person who said this about that game and this about, but it's like, yeah, but as long as it was a consistent opinion that actually came from the way they think about game development and not clickbait bullshit, then those are the opinions you need to have. The opinions that turn people off are the same ones that turn people on. And that process, I think, would work.
Yeah. When for all our listeners, when Matt talks about criticism, he's using it in the more academic sense of analysis, not just criticizing not being in the negative.
Cynical, not being cynical and negative. It's just, what did you think about this game?
And why?
Yeah, and why? Yeah. And the act of being a critic is literally just the act of loving something a whole lot. You love it so much that you want to talk about it and you want to talk to other people who love it. And that means you need to build a language. And the building of that language is what criticism is. And the people.
And it's what game design is.
I mean, it literally is. It is having really strong opinions about this stuff. So I do think you can have success in this space the way we've done it. But it is a more social media based thing. This has always been true, though. Even if you were a writer literally a novelist in the 1990s, your agent would say you have to sell yourself, right? The editors they want to like you. They don't, because you're the person they're going to be working with, not the book. So they need to like you. They need to look forward to the next meeting with you. And if you're a heinous misanthrope, they're not going to like you, right? And they're not going to want to work with you, right? And so I think it's a mistake to kind of write off social media as like a fad, right? Or a distraction. It's just a tool that, if you're a creative, you've always needed to be able to sell yourself. Otherwise, what is an interview? When you go to interview someplace to get a full-time gig, you're pitching yourself. And you have the opportunity to do that now. And YouTube is still a good place to do it, I think.
Yeah.
YouTube has not yet fallen to the hordes of enshittification.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Stay tuned.
You're not gonna monetize. I think that monetization era of YouTube is far in the past, right? But you ultimately you're gonna want to make your own products anyway, because that's why you're doing this. Make great products. Make products that, be part of your community. I can't tell you how many times, I don't get this, I think the needle has moved on this. I can't tell you how many times I would see in the early days of the channel when I would talk about what people were saying in the comments, right? Otherwise intelligent people say, what do you mean you read the comments? How are you new? Are you new here? Have you never been on the internet before? You don't read the comments. And I was the one trying to explain, but that's my community. It's my community. What do you mean not read the comments? And if I find a comment sufficiently offensive, that person's gone. They're going to ELO hell. They're going to spend the rest of their time in the shadow zone, right? And that's a critical component of success in this space, is building that community. It can be done. I just know that there are people that don't like doing it, right? And I completely respect that. There are people who think of it as being fake, right? There are people who think of the song and dance, which is kind of what I'm doing now, as being fake. But I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. I think that what succeeds is authenticity.
I think sometimes social media for like a really intense game designer, social media is seen as a distraction.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah,
it can be part of the process. It can be part of that creative process where you're actually engaging with the audience that you're serving.
That's the idea.
It's marketing people and PR people would pay good money for that sort of feedback, and you can get it for free.
Don't be afraid of your audience. Like, otherwise, what are you doing? Otherwise, what are you doing? Like, I do sometimes see people in this space, and I feel like the products they're making are not the ones that they want to play, right? And I kind of raise an eyebrow at that, but that's neither here nor there. Yeah, I think it can be done. I think it can be done. It's just that the avenues of doing it. If you were a freelancer in the 90s or in the 80s, there were like 4 companies you could work for, and that was it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
nobody knew anything. I mean, even very recently, nobody knew what anybody else paid or what was possible or anything about the industry. Right? All this knowledge is very, very new.
Yeah. And so I think it is possible for whether, I don't know. It's tough, guys. There's a lot of people contact us because they want to partner with us on various projects. Once or twice a month for 8 years. It hasn't slowed. People want to contact us, including companies I've heard of. And the ones we end up working with, they have 2 things in common. One, they are a serious business. So when we talk to them, their business model makes sense to us, right? And they also believe in what we're doing. They authentically think that what we are doing is cool. They're not mercenaries. They're reaching out to us because they think draw steel is neat, right? And we can tell you can't fake that stuff, right? And I know that there are people in the space, and I'm like, we're not interested in working with these people because we literally have no idea how they're going to make any money off of this. How are you going to make any money off this thing you're asking us to? It doesn't make any sense. Right. And so we have to say no. And that happens, I would say, more than half the time when a company reaches out to us, we have to say no. And it's very common that we literally have no idea how they're going to make any money off of this because they don't charge enough. They don't charge enough for it, or it takes too long, or they don't have they don't have the experience. And anyway. Yeah. I think that this hobby doesn't have to be a hobby. It can be a business. Right. But it has to do with thinking about things in terms of product rather than philosophy. I don't know.
Well, moving forward, we know that Draw Steel's out. Draw Steel has been I would go above a modest hit. I would say that it is very, very well received and being played in all quarters of the gaming industry. So what's next?
And
Oh,
how
that's a
do
good
you
question.
decide what's next?
Okay, well, the way we decide, this is interesting because the way you decide the way we decided what's next is, what do we have to do in order to keep our employees happy? Right? Matt got to have his fun, right? Draw Steel is very much Matt's game. It is the game of everybody that worked on it. I genuinely believe that. Everybody that worked on it can say that's my game. But it was, like I said earlier, it's largely my idea. So we're also working on a new RPG called Crows, which is a James Introcaso joint. It might have his name on the cover. I don't know. I don't know what his plan is for using freelancers, but as far as I'm concerned, if he's the only designer working on it, then it can have his name on the cover. It might have his name and Nick's name as the art director. Crows is a dungeon crawler RPG, and it's a 1-2 punch of as soon as we were talking about the MCDM RPG, we were talking about Crows because we didn't want to, live off of one meal alone. We wanted an outlet. We wanted an outlet for our other ideas that were diametrically opposed to heroic fantasy. So Crows has been in the background, including the name, has been in the background for literally like 3 or 4 years at this point. So that's one thing I just wanted to do it. I never thought of MCDM as being a one game company. When I was coming up, it would be really weird for a successful company to literally only have one game. And James wanted to work on a game that he was in charge of. He was like, I think the phrase literally was, I want to be able to work on something and Matt can't tell me no. And I was like, yeah, I respect that. What do you think I'm doing? I wanted to, and I got a chance to do that with Draw Steel. And I've worked every big team I've been on. There were senior people on that team who could have led their own project. And they were sort of doing their time in the trenches, but they were conscious of the fact that they were destined for better things. And the company had a choice, which is either give them a project or lose them. And some companies I worked at handled that better than others. And watching incredibly talented people leave just because the owners lacked vision, I think is a sin. I think it's terrible. So I was like 100%. James has earned it. He did so much work getting Flea Mortals and Draw Steel out the door that I was really happy that I was deeply joyous that he wanted to do Crows at MCDM. He doesn't need us. I would say that's broadly true of everybody that works here. They don't need MCDM. They can have enormous success on their own terms. So the fact that he wanted to stay and do Crows with us and that I get to play it and I'm watching this thing develop and I think it's remarkable. And this is a crazy thing to say. I'd really curious to know what James thinks. But I feel like Crows is an MCDM product. The way James is developing it, I think, is different than if it were literally just him working on his own for himself, right? I think it would be more personal and idiosyncratic. But I think Crows has a lot more of a kind of commercial sheen to it as a result of being an MCDM product. And then the other one is our art director, Jason Hasenauer. Same thing. He's like, I did your game as a sci-fi dungeon crawler. It's like sci-fi Gloomhaven. And we have a pitch for it that I'm not going to reveal until we're a lot closer to being ready for crowdfunding. That is like, it's more ambitious than Gloomhaven. And so, yeah. So, I mean, it's not, we don't have a working prototype of everything yet. So it's easy to be ambitious when it doesn't have to work. But we'll see. Yeah. We'll see what happens as we move forward. And then more Draw Steel. That's why we hired Paul Hughes. I mean, Draw Steel is still my baby. Like we were just talking about the next crowdfunder and whether or not we can run another crowdfunder this December. We weren't planning on it, but then we started to think maybe we could. And that would mean working hard to get more stuff done this year than we were planning on. But we like Draw Steel's a miracle. It is extraordinary to get to work on. And we're seeing this amazing process of third-party developers. There's an incredibly robust third-party development scene. And we are sourcing writers from there now. Like there are people who worked on our new hardcover, the Encounters book, who came from the community. And that's an incredible booster rocket to have people who have real chops, right? These are people that can really do it. And they love our game natively. It's not just a hustle. That's as good as it gets, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway.
The
Codex comes out in like a month. The actual codex actually releases on Steam Early Access. It's our proprietary VTT, worked with in partnership with a company called DM Hub, and it is. I think, as extraordinary as Draw Steel is, the existence of the codex in its current form is even more miraculous, and I think it's going to be a game changer. Teos is muted.
Oh,
Either that
thank
or
you.
I've gone down. Oh, no.
I love that that's my best mode, but I love that you prove me wrong all the time. So when early on you had a crowdfunder that did minis, MCDM making the classic mistake of getting distracted by minis. Oh, they're making a virtual tabletop? That's what Paizo said. They never delivered that. It's impossible. Wizards has been down that road multiple times. Here comes MCDM. They're going to fail at the codex. And then I'm looking at the codex. I'm like, wow, this thing is really gorgeous. How did this happen?
Yeah, we got again, luck, which is another way of saying it is just getting more at bats, right? Getting more chances to score. We just hung in there long enough. For me, the codex was a personal project. It was very, very, very important to me. I knew this as far back as Strongholds and Followers, that sooner or later we were going to make our own game and that we needed our own VTT. Because I don't think that anyone in this space who makes their own RPG is best served by other people making the virtual tabletop for their product, right? Your interests are not going to be aligned. The only way a VTT historically, and we're here to prove those people wrong, or prove them right. None of us will be surprised. None of us will be surprised if it turns out that we were wrong. But the common wisdom is making money in the virtual tabletop space requires you to attract every possible RPG customer. Doesn't matter if you like Blue Planet or 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons or Vampire the Masquerade or Blades in the Dark. We need all of those people to use this thing, which means it isn't really good at any of those things, right? And I watched that happen, and I'm like, that company is badly served. But it's like if you're a band, you don't want your songs played on a radio station no one listens to. You don't want your hot new song played on the oldie station. You're like, that's bad for our brand. Like, you want your players to have the best possible experience, and that means you need to have some control over it. And I very strongly believe that we could serve our fans better than anybody else could. And I still believe that. And I think the Codex shows that. Now, we were very lucky to get to work with DM Hub. They were already making a tool in this space, and we convinced them to take a chance on us, because we showed them, it wasn't that, I don't think it was that hard. I don't think they took a lot of convincing. This is more for them to speak to, but we just showed them how much money we make on virtual tabletop sales. Like, our product, like Flea Mortals, is on all the big virtual tabletops. And we're like, we're just going to show you, this is a hit book. This is a hit book, best-selling, not just for MCDM, but I think in the industry in terms of monster books. Incredibly well-selling monster book. Here's how many virtual tabletop copies we've sold across all platforms in the history of the book. And they looked at that and they were like, "Are you kidding? Are you joking?" And I was like, "Now you understand. I don't think there's a business model there. I'm just going to say that. I don't think there's a business model there. I think you can fool some people and you'll be able to get investment, but it's not going to last." And I think our way is better. We're going to charge a premium for it, just like everything else we do. We're going to charge a premium for it. But we're going to, it doesn't seem like a risk to us. Everybody who bought Draw Steel is going to get a copy of the Codex. That just happens. That's just, so we're relying, that's a crazy risky thing to do. But our attitude is, you already bought the game once. We don't feel like you should have to buy it again. So where we're going to make our money? Well, we think we're going to make our money from all the other people who haven't bought the game yet, right? The director bought the game and the players are playing it. Well, now the players got to spend some money. Somebody has to. It doesn't have to be the players, but somebody's got to spend that money now if you want to play in the Codex. If you want to play Draw Steel, you don't need to spend any money. The game is open. If you want to play Draw Steel online, you don't got to spend any money. Owlbear Rodeo is great. We use it all the time. All right. But if you want the prestige experience, the premier first class experience, that's literally how we think of it. If you want to fly first class, that costs money. And that's what we're putting our chips on, is that people will spend that money, and we'll all find out together. And not that long, 2-3 months from now, we'll all know.
Wow. Well, Matt, I want to keep talking to you for another 2 days, but something tells me we better wrap this up.
Yeah, fair enough. I feel like we covered a lot. Hopefully people
That's great.
get something out of this.
I think they will.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me on, gentlemen. I enjoyed this one a lot.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. And Matt, if people want to find you, if they want to hunt down MCDM, where do you hide? Where are those places people should go?
On social media, we are usually hello@MCDM. So that's Blue Sky, and I think I don't know if we're still on Twitter, but and I'm Matt Colville, or Matthew_Colville I'm on Blue Sky mostly, and Twitch all the time. And but actually, one of the things I like about Twitch is that it's terrible for discovery. So there's hardly anybody watches me on Twitch, which is how I like it. It's anytime the audio, if I stream on YouTube, people will watch, and that's terrifying. So I prefer Twitch. Yeah.
Right.
So hopefully it's a year from now, and there's something for us to talk about other than the imminent demise of MCDM. Hopefully we get a chance. And even if I think there will be a very interesting Mastering Dungeons about how everything went wrong if things go wrong. None of us, like I said, 8 years of MCDM to me is a miracle. It's astonishing we've made it this far. I would not be surprised if everything falls apart next week. I'd be like, well, it was a good run. We all knew it was a risk.
VH1, the story behind the music.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There you go.
Then the inevitable downturn.
That's right. Thank you so much, Matt. Always a pleasure to talk with you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Matt.
Wow. It's always amazing to hear Matt, because he has so much to say on the industry and on games. And I'm never disappointed when I sit down to listen to Matt talk.
I think he blew some minds today.
He did. And blowing your mind is what we try to do here. And you can help us do that by backing our Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/masteringdnd and become a Master of Dungeon supporter, a Master of Realm supporter, or a Master of the Multiverse who gets their name mangled by me in real time. Here we go. Agile Monk of Fantasy Companion Workshops. Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios. Craig Bailey. Rudy Chainsaw Basso. Dave Bastianson. Derek, the Bearded GM. Steve Bissonette. Merrick Blackman. Boschjan from Duality Press. Calvin Bridges of Alos. Robo Ballin. Kevin Criswell. That Inertia DM. Evil John. Evan at Nimbleco. Will Doyle. Andy Edmonds at NerdRonomicon.com. James Fisher. Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios. Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman. Shawn Hurst. Piper Lexic. The Jaunty Mantis TTRPG Podcast. Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound. The Mighty Jerd. JR of the Twilight Perspective. JT Evans. Brian King. Jim Klingler. Gail Cormandy. Chad Lynch. Paul Mata. The Mathemagician. Jaron from Mathis Arcanum. Eric Mengi. Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography. Trey McLemore. John Mickey. Michael. Sean Mowley. Falcon Neal. Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety. DT Norris of DT and Dragons. Bill Wirt from the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo. Philip and Lindsay. Frog Prince at Tentacle Squelching Wetly. Post Fiction RPG Audio. Ricardo Who Might Adventure. Robert Pasley. Vladimir Prenner from Croatia. Ozymandias Rex. Runner Rick. Chance Russo at Drago Russo. Andy Shakti. Vishna Simos. Tim Smith. Spark from Dunor Games. Jeff Stevens at jeffstevensgames.com. Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast. Ellis the Stormlord. Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast. Tres. Ryan Truk. Joe Tyler. Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM. Vidwokles G. Also check out Photography Surfaces in Bergen, Norway. Vin Aku. James Walton. Graham Ward. Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games. Javier Waziak. Waterford Wizard. Chris Webster. Ian Wright. Zach Types. And Z. Walt Winfrey. Thank you all for your support. Even if you can't help us via our Patreon, we appreciate you listening. You can also help by going out and giving us a review wherever you listen to this podcast. or go onto YouTube at youtube.com/@masteringdungeons and subscribe and like and do all the things you can do there. Teos, what have you been up to?
I don't think I've done anything new recently. Been too busy cracking suns. But come by alphastream.org and catch a classic blog post. Shawn, where do we find you?
There you go. You can find me at Shawn Merwin on the socials. You can go to at Mastering D&D on the socials to find us there. Whew. So we have recorded the news. We have talked to Matt. We know everything we need to know about gaming, both for Draw Steel and for D&D. So what are we going to do now?
We're going to launch our line of heat-resistant glue so that people can fix that sun if it does get cracked. We're going to profit, you and I, Shawn.
This is true. And it's also not good to sun the crack. I have found. Just saying in general.
If anyone wondered if we scripted these, we do not.
We didn't. Okay.